I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the glass in my hand started to shake, the condensation slicking my palm. I was standing by the frosted window of a small bistro 3 towns over from where I live, the kind of place you go when you don't want to run into anyone you know. But there they were. Across the street, emerging from a boutique cinema, was Julian, my ex-husband, and tucked under his arm, laughing at something he whispered into her ear, was my younger sister, Beatrice. The air in my lungs felt like lead. It had been exactly 14 months since the divorce papers were finalized, ending a 12-year marriage that I thought was built on granite, but turned out to be shifting sand. Seeing him shouldn't have hurt this much anymore. But seeing him with her, that was a different kind of agony. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was a total erasure of my reality. Beatrice, who had held me while I sobbed through the first 6 months of the separation. Beatrice, who had called Julian a coward and a manipulator over Sunday brunch. I watched as he pulled her closer to shield her from the light drizzle. He tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, a gesture so familiar it made my stomach flip. He used to do that to me every single morning while the coffee brewed. Now he was doing it to the person who shared my DNA. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. This wasn't a new spark. The way they moved together, the synchronized rhythm of their walk, it was seasoned, it was practiced. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dim light of the bistro, watching my life's greatest betrayal walk down the sidewalk until they disappeared around the corner. I went home to an empty house, my mind spinning. I barely slept, waiting for the sun to rise so I could find some piece of evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. But the truth I found the next day wasn't just about an affair. It was about a theft I never saw coming. The morning light felt intrusive, cutting through the blinds of my kitchen like a spotlight on a crime scene. My head throbbed with the kind of dull ache that only comes from a night spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every family dinner and holiday for the last 3 years. Every time Julian had stayed late at the office, every time Beatrice had dropped by while I was at the bakery. I felt like an investigator looking at a cold case, realizing all the clues had been screaming at me the whole time. I sat at my desk with my laptop. I needed to know. I still had access to our old shared cloud storage. Julian was a brilliant architect, but he viewed technology as a necessary evil. He never bothered to change the recovery email, which was still my secondary account. My hands were trembling so hard I missed the keys twice. Login. Access granted. I started by looking for dates. I wanted to see if the late nights from 2 years ago were actually nights spent with Beatrice. I scrolled through the folders of photos and documents. Nothing seemed out of place at first, just old tax returns and blurry vacation photos. I felt a momentary surge of guilt. Was I being paranoid? Was I looking for a monster where there was only a coincidence? Then I saw a folder titled Sub-Level Projects. It was created 3 years ago, a full 2 years before our divorce. Inside weren't client business plans, they were blueprints. Julian had always dreamed of building a custom estate on the coast. We used to talk about it over glasses of wine, sketching ideas on napkins. I clicked on the PDF, expecting to see the house we had talked about building together, but the floor plans were different. This house was larger, more aggressive in its design, and it had specific features that weren't for me. There was a dedicated kiln room and an art studio. I don't paint, but Beatrice does. There was a specialized garden layout for heirloom roses, my mother's favorite, which Beatrice obsessively grew in her backyard. I scrolled to the bottom of the document. There, in the digital signature line for the secondary owner, it wasn't my name. It was Beatrice Vance. She had signed those papers while I was still wearing Julian's wedding ring. She had signed them while she was helping me pick out paint colors for our forever home. I sat back, the silence of the room ringing in my ears. This wasn't just a physical betrayal, it was a structural one. They hadn't just been having an affair, they had been designing a life together while I was still living in the one they were planning to demolish. But as I dug deeper into the folder, I found a subfolder titled Legal Prep. I opened the first document, a spreadsheet, and the air left the room. It was a detailed list of my personal assets, the inheritance from our grandmother, the small boutique bakery I had worked 10 years to build, and even the equity in our current home. Beside each item were notes on how to devalue or transfer these assets during a divorce proceeding. Julian hadn't just left me, he and my sister had systematically stripped me of my financial security before he ever served me the papers. I looked at the dates. Beatrice had been the one to recommend the lawyer I used, a friend of hers. Now I realized why that lawyer had been so quick to tell me to settle. They had played me like a fool. For the next 4 hours, I didn't move from that chair. I became a ghost in my own history. I followed the digital breadcrumbs they had left behind, oblivious to the fact that I still had the key. I found emails between Julian and the lawyer Beatrice suggested. They were discussing my bakery. During the divorce, the bakery had been valued at half its actual worth because Julian's firm had accidentally filed a lien against the property for unpaid consulting fees for work that was never done. I had been so overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the split that I hadn't questioned it. I just wanted it over. I had let them take half of my business's value because I trusted my sister when she said, "It's better to just move on, Marin. Don't let him drag you through the mud." She wasn't protecting me from the mud. She was making sure I stayed in it so I wouldn't look up and see what they were doing. I found bank transfers from our joint account into a shell company called BV Designs. BV, Beatrice Vance. They had funneled over $80,000 into that account under the guise of home repairs on our old house, repairs that were never made. That money had gone toward the land purchase for their coastal estate. I felt a cold, sharp stone forming in my stomach. The grief was gone, replaced by a crystalline, focused rage. I realized that my sister hadn't just taken my husband. She had stolen my grandmother's legacy. That inheritance was supposed to be for the entire family's future. I called my brother, Silas. He was the only one in the family who had stayed neutral, mostly because he lived out of state and hated family politics. "Silas," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to go to the safe deposit box Grandma left us, the one only you and Beatrice have the keys for." "Marin, it's 6 in the morning. What's going on?" "Just check it, Silas. Check the ledger for the family trust. Tell me if the bond certificates are still there." I waited on the line, listening to his heavy breathing. 10 minutes passed, then 20. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaking. "Marin, they're gone. The bonds were liquidated 6 months ago. The signature on the withdrawal, it's Beatrice, but there's a co-signer, Julian." "They used the family trust as collateral for Julian's new development," I whispered. "He couldn't get the bank loans on his own because his firm was over-leveraged. They stole the family safety net to build their house." "I'm getting on a plane," Silas said, his voice hardening. "Don't do anything yet. Don't call them." "I'm not calling them, Silas," I said, looking at the blueprints on my screen. "I'm going to let them finish their house. I want them to put every last cent they have into it, and then I'm going to take the roof off." The months that followed were a masterclass in performance art. I saw Beatrice at family dinners. I sat across from her and watched her play the role of the concerned sister. She would reach across the table, pat my hand, and say how glad she was that I was finding myself after the divorce. "You look so much better, Marin," she'd say, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of suspicion. "I'm so proud of how you've handled everything. Julian was, well, he was a lot to deal with." "He was," I would agree, sipping my wine. "But you know what they say, everything comes out in the wash." I watched her flinch just a tiny bit. She was dating him openly now, claiming they had reconnected 6 months after the divorce. The family had been shocked, but Beatrice was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She had spun a narrative that she was saving him from his own loneliness, and that they had both been grieving for me in their own way. It was a sick, twisted fairy tale, and the rest of the family was buying it because it was easier than facing the truth. Meanwhile, Silas and I were working. We hired a private investigator who specialized in forensic accounting. We tracked the shell companies. We found the paper trail where Julian had devalued my bakery. We found the forged documents Beatrice had used to access the family trust without Silas's consent. We waited until the coastal estate, their Project Phoenix, was 90% complete. Julian had poured every dime of his personal wealth, the stolen bakery equity, and the embezzled trust funds into this house. It was his masterpiece. It was also his coffin. The grand unveiling was set for a Friday night. They invited the whole family along with Julian's biggest investors. They wanted to show off. They wanted the world to see their triumph over the ashes of my marriage. I arrived late. I wore a dress that Julian had bought me for our 10th anniversary, the one he said made me look like the most powerful woman in the room. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like the woman they had spent 2 years gaslighting. The house was a glass and steel monstrosity perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful in a cold, sterile way. I saw Beatrice standing in the center of the living room, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat, likely another gift from our grandmother's trust. "Marin," she chirped, her voice hitting a high, nervous note as I approached. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know this might be hard for you to see." "Hard?" I looked around, my smile wide and hollow. "No, Beatrice, it's illuminating. You've really thought of everything. The art studio is perfect, and the roses, they're just like the ones in the blueprints you signed 3 years ago." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Julian, who was standing nearby with a group of investors, froze. "Blueprints?" he stammered, trying to laugh it off. "Marin, you've had too much champagne. We only started the designs last year." "Is that right?" I brought a stack of envelopes from my bag, the ones where the district attorney was very interested in the metadata on those digital files, the ones where you and Beatrice discussed how to devalue my bakery to fund this very floor we're standing on. The room went silent. The investors, sensing blood in the water, began to lean in. I also brought copies of the family trust ledger for everyone to see. It turns out, using embezzled funds to back a construction loan is a federal offense. Silas is outside with the board of the family foundation right now. They've already filed the injunction. The chaos that followed was quiet, but devastating. There were no screams, no dramatic slaps. There was just the sound of a dozen high-powered investors walking toward the door, their lawyers already on their phones. Julian tried to come toward me, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "You think you've won? I'll tie you up in court for years." "With what money, Julian?" I asked. "The bank has already frozen the accounts associated with the shell companies. The lien I placed on this property this afternoon means you can't sell a single brick. And Beatrice, the family is already moving to have you stripped of your inheritance rights. You didn't just lose a sister today. You lost everything you thought you were entitled to." Beatrice was shaking, her hand clutching the back of a designer chair. "Marin, we're family. How could you do this?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my sister. I saw a stranger who had worn my sister's face while she picked my pockets. family doesn't build their dreams on the wreckage of their sister's life," I said. "You didn't love him, Beatrice. You just wanted what was mine. And Julian didn't love you. He just needed a partner who wouldn't ask where the money was coming from. You deserve each other, but you don't deserve this house." I walked out of the glass and steel prison they had built. Silas was waiting for me in the driveway. He didn't say anything. He just put his arm around my shoulder and led me to the car. It took 2 years for the legal dust to settle. Julian's firm went bankrupt, and he eventually served a short sentence for financial fraud. Beatrice was forced to pay back every cent she took from the trust, living now in a cramped apartment in the city, working a job she hates to cover the legal fees. I got my bakery back. All of it. I rebranded it. I called it The Foundation. People ask me if I regret being so cold to my own blush and blood. They ask if I could ever forgive them. I tell them that forgiveness is for mistakes. What they did was a design. You don't forgive a blueprint. You just build something better in its place. Sometimes I drive out to the coast. The house is still there, empty and gray, a monument to a life that was never meant to be. I don't feel sad when I see it. I don't feel the sting of betrayal anymore. I just feel the wind off the ocean and the solid ground beneath my feet, ground that for the first time in my life, I know for a fact is mine. I realized that the moral resolution wasn't in their poverty or their shame. It was in my own refusal to be a silent ghost in their story. I had spent 12 years being the support beam for Julian's life and 30 years being the protector for Beatrice. When I stopped holding them up, they fell, and in the silence that followed, I finally learned how to stand on my own. The house on the cliff eventually went into foreclosure. It was bought by a nonprofit that turned it into a retreat for women rebuilding their lives after domestic and financial abuse. I like to think that the art studio is finally being used by someone who actually has something beautiful to create, rather than someone trying to paint over the truth. As for me, I wake up every morning in a house that is small, filled with light, and entirely paid for. I make my coffee, I tuck my own hair behind my ear, and I breathe. I'm no longer an architect of other people's happiness. I'm the builder of my own.